Welcome to Ziffity Quick Chat.
Want the simplicity and effortlessness of a B2C experience. Offline manual process and move it online. It doesn't replace going into the warehouse these are long-term relationships. 50% increase in conversion rate and 100% increase in the average order value. Whether it's because you've got fantastic content, educational content about the product. We have merchants on BigCommerce that don't actually have a checkout. Let's get that top of funnel of a quote through the site. And then my sales team are going to pick it up, and I know you're going to love talking to them. And so we're going to close the sale, right?
Maybe a brief intro, maybe tell our listeners who you are, how you got to play this role, and then we can get into the details of the discussion today, which is mostly around B2B practices and technology.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Marco. Thank you so much for having me on today. As you said, I am the general manager of B2B here at BigCommerce. I look after the success of wholesalers, manufacturers, distributors on the BigCommerce platform. And for anyone who isn't familiar with BigCommerce, we are a SaaS e-commerce platform focusing on enterprise manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, and suppliers. I've been at BigCommerce for coming up to 2.5 years now. I actually joined originally to look after our acquisition of Feedonomics, which is a fantastic platform for syndicating product data to ad channels and to marketplaces. It's the best platform out there, used by 35% of the IR 1000. Really incredible platform, and used by some incredible B2B businesses as well. But I transitioned into the role I'm in today. At BigCommerce, we appreciate just how big the opportunity is for B2B merchants, manufacturers, distributors to move online. And we have the perfect platform for helping them do that. And I'm really excited to be helping drive that digital transformation in this industry with such a great team here at BigCommerce, dedicated purely to manufacturers and distributors, building fantastic products that no doubt we will dive into in a little bit more detail.
The topic for today is how B2B stores can take on challenges involving the purchase process, which is, as we know, slightly different and slightly more complicated than it is for direct-to-consumer, for the direct-to-consumer space. And while the e-commerce tools and platforms for B2B have evolved a lot over the last few years, I think there's still a gap between these tools and the actual operational processes that B2B distributors have to carry on in order to take advantage of these tools. And as consumer expectations grow consistently, these businesses that perhaps were traditionally mostly held offline and are now making the transition have to put a little bit more thought and effort into establishing a more than just a buy-sell relationship with customers. And I think a big or an important part of the challenge is acquiring a new customer base. A lot of these businesses have an existing portal type interface where existing customers know to log in to look for their information or make purchasing decisions. But as websites become more advanced, the interaction between humans and websites is also changing over time. The expectations that you have as far as how quickly these load, how intuitive the interfaces should be. A lot of these B2B merchants, I think, have to start transitioning somehow from the traditional portal experience to a more consolidated, leaner, more intuitive purchasing experience online that may be more akin to the direct-to-consumer experience that we're used to nowadays, although with specific nuances and tools for the B2B space. I think there's different parts of the process of the B2B purchasing process that tools and platforms like BigCommerce can cater to, and we'll step through some of those today. But yeah, I think as far as
I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, which is that the digitally native buyer has a different expectation than the buyer that came before.
Mm-hmm.
And that buyer is used to being able to interact online with their merchant, with whoever's selling product to them. And that's what they do in their personal purchases, for their personal purchases. And they expect a similar experience when it comes to purchasing on behalf of a business. And we hear a lot about, B2B buyers want a B2C-like experience. And the way I really think about it is B2B buyers want the simplicity and effortlessness of a B2C experience, but they still have all of the demands and complexity of the B2B process. And we'll probably dive into that in a little bit more detail later. But I think this morning, my dog had chewed through his Bene bone and I needed to buy a new one. It was 2 clicks on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So simple, so fast. That's the simplicity that we want to bring to B2B. The process shouldn't be cumbersome. It shouldn't be laborious. And what we really believe is the future of manufacturing and distribution sales is true omni-channel. So regardless of where you're interacting, maybe this is a manufacturer of construction materials, right? So I might purchase online for a delivery. I might go into the warehouse. I might phone up and speak to a salesperson to get that order through. I might be trying to place a quote, right? A quote request. Mm-hmm. Regardless of kind of where I interact, all of that information should be available online. And so we take some of that kind of offline manual process and move it online. It doesn't replace going into the warehouse to make a purchase. It doesn't replace phoning the sales team, but it makes the follow-up easier and more and simpler and more streamlined. I think that's what merchants are trying to achieve, and it's what buyers want them to get to, because it's simpler for everyone.
Totally agree. And I think that's a great segue into the first question that we had here, which is just what are some of the things that make the business to business purchase more complicated or complex compared to the direct to consumer? So maybe Lance, you can tell us a little bit about, the handful of differentiators between that purchase process and what complexities that introduces. And then we can step into talking about how the tech solves for those complications.
Yeah. And it starts by understanding this buyer journey. Understanding the differences in the buyer journey is how manufacturers, distributors can move business online. When they understand how buyers are finding their products, the information that they want, how they then want to check out and purchase. But I think a great place to start, we take my example from this morning, right? I bought a chew toy for my dog. I made that decision in about 3 minutes. I made the purchase in under a minute. There were no approval workflows needed. My payment method was credit card. It was very, very simple. No one else was involved in the transaction. It's one time. Admittedly, my lifetime value on Amazon is pretty high, I think, but it's nowhere near as high as a manufacturer of construction materials is with their contractors that are purchasing products. And then if we compare that to, let's use that example of a house builder, who is purchasing from a manufacturer of construction materials, in order to determine the products that needed to be bought, there were multiple people involved. There were designs made, and those designs led to purchase orders for an amount of material that were probably reviewed by 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe many people. If this was a commercial building, those purchases would have been reviewed by many, many people before that order was placed. When I'm placing the order, depending on how important a customer I am, I may get different pricing. I get pricing that I've negotiated. If I'm a large house builder, commercial builder, and I'm using this manufacturer, their products on multiple sites, I've probably negotiated pricing that may have been in effect for years. And I expect to get that pricing for all of my projects, maybe across the country and across any warehouse that I'm getting these products from. That complexity does not exist generally in B2C, but it exists everywhere in manufacturing and distribution. I think here at BigCommerce, right, if I want to make a purchase of a new piece of software, I don't go online and put my credit card details in. I go into a system, I fill out a procurement request that goes off to our procurement team. They have specific limits on what could be spent, budget limits, specific ways that we would need to pay for it, right? They need to get a purchase order that needs to then be approved. There's a long process that needs to be followed. And that's true across most of manufacturing and distributing. And with commerce, none of that changes. You still have all of those processes. We're just bringing them online where we can and making that journey more seamless.
What about the very beginning of the purchase flow, which usually involves research, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that usually looks like for a B2B merchant, and what are some of the, either in general, techniques that you have found to be successful, or perhaps a little bit more specifically, what are some of the tools or tactics that tech like BigCommerce can provide to help in that initial part of the process, which is just finding out what's out there, what are what's the pricing landscape, and what are the options before they even start negotiating, before the entire approval process gets introduced. Could you talk a little bit about that piece, the research piece?
Yeah, that's a great point. I sort of missed that. You're right. I purchased that bone for my dog. I did zero research. I typed it into Amazon, I clicked buy, and that was it. Of course, in B2B, there is a lot of research often that is going into the products that are going to be purchased. That's true for distributors of safety equipment and those manufacturers of building materials. And what we found, and we actually recently at BigCommerce here did a survey of just over 1,000 B2B buyers, and we asked, where does your product research start? And unsurprisingly, it starts the same place as the majority of product research, B2B or B2C, which is on search engines. It starts by typing into Google. Let's be honest, Google is the number one search engine out there. Into Google, I am looking for a brand new desk setup for my office. I am looking for this type of safety equipment for my factory. That's how it starts. And so if that's where the majority of research is starting, manufacturers, distributors, B2B businesses need to think about how are they going to appear in those searches. And that generally fits into sort of two buckets. One, SEO, search engine optimization, and two, paid for advertising. And you need to be on top of both, right? So SEO is all about having fantastic content in your pages, making sure that you've got the right links, you've got the right setup, the right site maps, etc. From a BigCommerce perspective, that's sort of out of the box. You have to do the content, but in terms of making sure your website is set up in the correct manner, it's out of the box. the paid piece, that's where it's a little bit different, right? You have to think about cost per click and how much are you willing to pay for adverts on a search engine. And maybe you're putting your products onto something like a Google Shopping, right? So that you're going to appear right at the top of that search. And in that case, you've got to get your data from wherever it lives. That could be, in a PIM, it could be in BigCommerce, it could be in an ERP into Google. And that's where something like a Feedonomics becomes very, very, very valuable, because they are the best platform at taking that data, transforming it into the right formats for the highest performance on a Google, and then getting the data into the platform. And a lot of people, a lot of merchants don't think about this. And there's a great example with Nike, right? If you go on to, I know this is a B2C example, but we can have shoe distributors out there. If you go onto the Nike website and you look at a shoe, the title for that shoe, well, it just says Nike. In fact, it won't say Nike. It'll say Zoom, Air, whatever the name is. That's about it. And that's because you're on their website. You're on the Nike website, so they don't need to put the brand name in there. And you are selecting the size and the color and the gender in the site. You know that you're already there. And so their product information that's on the site may not be the information that you need to be performant on Google. So when you send that over to Google, it needs to know the brand, it needs to know the gender, it needs to know the size, and it needs to know the color. If you don't put that information in and add it in, you're not going to be performant. So this is particularly true for manufacturers out there, right? On your website, that information is maybe built into categorization, but it's not necessarily built into the product information on the store. And so you need to find a way to transform that data and get it into the search engine, let's say Google Shopping, in the right format, so it can be performant, and that you're going to get the clicks that mean that you rise to the top, you bubble to the top of Google's rankings, and that you're paying a lower cost per click. In the example I just gave, the Nike shoe that is sent to Google without without the brand, without the gender, and without the size, and then when you compare that to the shoe that is sent with all of that information, the cost per click halves. There's a huge saving in terms of your cost of advertising. And so I always think it starts there. But once you've figured out, okay, I've got my SEO strategy, I've got my paid marketing strategy, you really have to think about what value add are you providing to your customer, to your buyer. And it's all about education, right? If you're looking at building materials and you're doing research, does your website as a distributor, does it have the information that I am looking for as a buyer to better understand this product, right? To better understand the dimensions, the value, how it is better than other products, comparison. And so we always talk about educating the buyer, and that's really key in this journey as well. When you're attracting customers in, make sure you're educating them, right? They will come back if you're able to impart wisdom.
So then let's step from the research part of the purchasing process over to the next point of complication that you mentioned, which is approvals, right? The approvals process, which may involve multiple stakeholders within the organization of the buyer. Likewise, can you tell us a little bit about what's some advice, some generic advice that you would give to B2B merchants for simplifying their approval process, and then perhaps a little bit more specifically, what can BigCommerce do to alleviate some of those pain points?
Yeah, for sure. So you've attracted the customer in. Hopefully you've educated them. They've watched your product demonstration videos. This is the junior buyer who's doing the research, right? That's who's probably doing the research. They're the junior buyer. They don't actually have purchasing power.
Right.
They did you've educated them. They've seen all your fantastic information about maybe an HVAC system that you're selling, and now they have to go to their manager with the detail and ask for approval to make the purchase. Quite just as you said, and you can go and you look at Forrester and Gartner. They both have reports that will say there are up to 10 approvals needed for B2B purchases. And today, for merchants that haven't built their own approval, so for manufacturers, distributors out there who haven't built an approval flow into maybe their site, their buyers are doing this in email, right? Mm-hmm. They just send off an email to the manager that says, hey, can you respond yes and approve this purchase, all offline. Maybe it's in spreadsheets. There could be e-procurement systems. I mentioned, at BigCommerce, we have that sort of system where I submit a request and approval comes back. And then maybe it is happening online. Maybe the distributor you're purchasing for has built all of that in. The way that you, as a B2B merchant, should think about this is how do you insert yourself into the right places in that approval journey? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That approval workflow, right? And where is that happening? So what value add can you provide? And that's an interesting discussion. I always tell B2B merchants to sit down with their buyers and understand that journey first before diving headfirst into building something. If you haven't really understood what the majority of your buyers, how the majority of your buyers purchase, you may build something or do something that they'll end up not really using, right? And so if 90% of your buyers are using some e-procurement system, you have to make sure that you're in that system. Whether that's Coupa, Ariba, whatever it might be, make sure that your products are on that system and that they can purchase through that system. So with BigCommerce, we partner with TradeCentric, who will effectively pump your product into Coupa, Ariba. In fact, they provide a window. It's punch out. They provide a window into your store. And then all of that workflow just can sit in that system, nice and easy. Or maybe if you're selling to smaller businesses, they would actually love if you in your site could build some of that workflow and build those approvals. And then you could think about bringing it into your site, maybe having roles and permissions and allowing your buyers, that junior buyer, to put items into a cart and then send them off to their to their manager to approve and purchase, all built into your site. And so lots of different options there for merchants, but it starts with understanding the majority of that buyer workflow.
For sure. So perhaps for those listening who may not know, because I know this is something that took me a little bit to understand at first when I first came across this concept, the concept of punch-out catalogs. Could you give us a very brief just description of what that is for anyone who may not be familiar with what it is and how that works?
Yeah, for sure. So if I have an e-procurement system, a punch-out catalog is effectively a view into your site or into your catalog where the buyer views your catalog, selects the items that they wish to purchase, and then punches out back into their e-procurement system, and that's where the purchase flow then occurs. And so with to speak, specifically to how this happens within BigCommerce, and we have many merchants who have set up punch out for their customers that are using systems like Coupa and Ariba. Their buyer logs into their e-procurement instance, and they will select to view this manufacturer's, this distributor's store, and they will be shown effectively their BigCommerce storefront, and they will add items into the cart. But instead of then checking out when they get to the checkout, they don't. They punch out, and those items are taken back into the e-procurement system, and then the purchase is completed in that system. The data, once the purchase is completed, the order flows back into BigCommerce. So there's no lost data there. There's no lost information. The order flows back through. But the approval process can then happen in that e-procurement system. So the junior buyer built the cart to get back into their e-procurement system and then pinged their boss and their manager to say, hey, the cart's ready, please can you approve it? And for larger businesses out there, a lot of them are using this sort of system to manage their purchase workflow.
Very cool. So thanks for that. I want to point out I think an important, well, it may be kind of obvious, I think it's still important, difference between the type of buyer in B2B versus B2C spaces. And that is the fact that a B2B buyer is more often than not purchasing something on impulse, right? They're not just browsing. They're not seeing what looks good, what looks attractive. They've thought about this. They usually spend some amount of time deciding, right? Looking and deciding. Could you maybe take a few moments to tell us how BigCommerce keeps or helps keep these people engaged through that decision period and eventually nudge them towards conversion?
I like the nudge there. We're going to nudge towards conversion.
That's all you can do, right? You can never.
Exactly. Little nudges that help push them towards the buy button. And actually, this process, there are some differences here between B2B and B2C, but a lot of this is the same. It's the same tools. What we're really seeing here is that the cutting edge, if you like, of B2C conversion moving into to B2B. Some of those same tactics being used, right? In B2C, it's all about keeping someone on your site and incentivizing them to put that product into the cart and check out. However possible, right? Make that happen. If that's a pop-up discount, promotion, dynamic promotions, dynamic pricing, anything. As you say, in B2B, it's different. These are long-term relationships that aren't just based on one item in a cart and checkout, but some of the same techniques still apply, right? So dynamic content, being able to show different products in a search based on purchase history, based on search history, based on site interactions. That's still the same in B2B and B2C. We have a great example of the largest independent distributor of construction materials in the UK. They recently went live on BigCommerce, and they implemented with one of our partners, Bloomreach, that sort of search, dynamic search. They saw a 50% increase in conversion rate and 100% increase in the average order value. Just incredible material numbers. And that's because as a customer was putting in lumber into the cart, they could now suggest you should probably be purchasing nails at the same time. Or based on their history, they are adjusting that search return to put the most likely products for purchase right at the top. And so kind of that dynamic content and promotions as well can be pretty similar, right? So you've got items in cart, flash up. I can see you've gone away from the cart. I'm going to flash up a 10% off promotion just to see if you bite. And some of that can still be similar. Obviously, there's lots of marketing techniques out there, right? Abandoned cart emails, promotional emails. We see all of the same things. Where I think there are differences, though, payment options is one. If I'm a B2B business, I am likely purchasing using bank transfer or on terms, right? Most B2B purchases, when I make the purchase, I don't make a payment. I have 30 days to pay, 45 days to pay. Offering those same terms is really important. Being able to offer those terms online and being able to pay with the payment methods that business has approved, right? When I purchase on Amazon, I use my credit card. I could use any credit card. But if I'm purchasing on behalf of BigCommerce, there are limits on what I can use. And so you need to be able to accept those payment terms at the right time. And the other thing is, and this is more of a general point, but and I kind of spoke to it, in B2C, you want to keep a buyer on your site for as long as possible, because then they are more likely to purchase. Well, that's not as true in B2B. It is still true. And so if you can keep that buyer on your site, whether it's because you've got fantastic content, educational content about the product, or it's because they're coming because they pay invoicing through your site, you can merchandise to them, or because quoting is online and that's how they can access quoting. The longer you keep them there, the more likely they are to check out and convert on your store and on your. Those are many of the same tactics, but a little bit different approach when it comes to how do you keep someone on your site for longer. You've got a few more. It's a B2B business. You've got a few more tricks up your sleeve, if you like, that you can use to try and keep someone on your site.
And it makes sense, at least the way I see it. I think it makes sense that a lot of these tactics would be the same. I think at our core, the attention and attraction mechanisms that drive a person to interact and spend are probably the same, very similar, if not the same, regardless of the type of role that you have within your company, and if that's a purchaser versus just a civilian shopping on Amazon. I think the things that make an interface a good interface are usually always the same. So I think that's a good point. So now, part of that period of time between first engagement and conversion usually, or maybe not usually, but a lot of times involves price negotiations, right? Requesting quotes, establishing some sort of communication channel to negotiate that quote, and then eventually reach an agreement and agree to the purchase. Could you tell us a little bit about, again, in kind of a two-part question, in general, what are some of the challenges? How would you recommend a business approach that negotiation phase? And then also, what are some of the more specific tools that BigCommerce offers to ease that communication and that engagement back and forth between the purchaser and the merchant?
Yeah. A lot of B2B business starts with a quote. And in fact, often that quote is thought of kind of the top of funnel. It's that first interaction that has pulled a buyer into your sphere. They come to your site, they've picked up the phone, and they are building out a quote. That's how it all starts. And so as a B2B business, you want to make it as easy as possible for a buyer to request that quote, for a buyer to build that quote, right? And get items into that quote so they can start the negotiation. Because once they've started the negotiation, then you've got them. The interaction has started. It's like it's BigCommerce, when we're prospecting a merchant, they read one of our marketing materials. We want them to put their email in to read something, so we know who they are. It's very similar here for a B2B business. You've gone into the site, you've looked around, or maybe you've even received a catalog, right? And you're thinking about what you buy. What you want is them to then reach out and start building that quote with you, so your best sales folks can be on the phone helping them, trying to convert. That's where you really want to get to, right? And so how do you do that? How do you make it as simple as possible? Online is really the way to do it. We have merchants on BigCommerce that don't actually have a checkout on their site. They just have a quote.
Oh, we've seen that.
Yeah, right. And it kind of makes sense, because it's maybe a complex purchasing process that online, maybe I couldn't, necessarily explain all the details for the variants and SKUs that are potentially possible. And actually, I know as the business that once I get you on the phone, I have a much higher conversion rate. So let's get that top of funnel of a quote through the site. And then my sales team are going to pick it up, and I know you're going to love talking to them. And so we're going to close the sale, right? And so that's often how we are advising, certain businesses to go. If they don't want to go all the way to as often is probably the wrong word, but if they don't want to go straight to, cart and checkout and selling online, maybe just start with that quoting. Automate as much of that online as you possibly can. So by the time it gets to your sales team, the sales team have as much information as they could, right? They don't have to extract that on the phone. They know the products that you're looking at. You could add extra notes. If there's customizations, you can upload that customization. You can upload text specs online. You put all of this detail into your sales team's hands. That's just great for them when they get on the phone. They're so well educated about this buyer that they make it much easier to get through to that conversion point. So what does BigCommerce offer here? Well, our B2B edition has quoting out of the box. And so you can put quoting into your store, both on the product detail page and as a sort of separate create a quote function and flow. And so if I'm a buyer and I'm going through the site, I'm looking at different products, different product detail pages, rather than adding to cart, I add to quote. And slowly my quote's built up. I add those notes, I add text specs, I add customizations, and I hit submit, and it gets assigned to a salesperson. And that salesperson can then respond via email, they can pick up the phone, or there's a specific workflow built for creating a quote. So you go onto the quote page, and the buyer can then search the whole catalog and very easily add, very, very quickly add lots of SKUs into that quote to then submit it. And so there's those two kind of workflows that are built into our B2B edition.
And I think good advice. A lot of times we see merchants solving the bottom of the funnel first, right? They establish the checkout experience, they make it work, they have their payment terms, they have their shipping terms, and they still struggle bringing the quote / pricing negotiation part of their business online, right? They may be used to solving that in some way without these platforms and technology. And while they have the bottom of the funnel solved technology wise, they still don't have that top of the funnel working as efficiently as it could. The top of the funnel would be the best thing to solve for first, to have that established, like you said, even if the checkout itself doesn't happen online, right?
I couldn't agree more, right? If you're getting online, maybe you're online, but you've had a custom platform that just hasn't been as performant as you would like because it isn't SEO optimized, etc., or you're not online at all. By getting online, you're now visible to the world. Mm-hmm. Anyone can find your site. Your top of funnel just became huge. Mm-hmm. And so I completely agree with you. I think you're spot on, which is if you start with the top of funnel, you've got a fantastic sales team that are great at closing and converting. So let's give them a huge funnel to now start with. And that is the fact that you're online and that someone can fill out that quote request and get it into the hands of the sales team. I've actually got a great example here. So on BC, we've got a book distributor, a bulk book distributor. The average order value is $1,500 or thereabouts. And back earlier this year, they emailed our product director one Monday morning and said, "Hey, John, we've just come in on Monday morning to find $1 million order sat in, I think it's $1 million quote, sorry, $1 million quote sat in our BigCommerce store from someone we've never spoken to before. Would not have been possible without their site, and it wouldn't have been possible without the quote."
Right.
That's the power of getting online and having that top of funnel, right? Their sales team can then pick up, speak to the buyer, close the deal, offer the discounts needed, right? But if they didn't have that top of funnel, they may never have entered this distributor's funnel at all, right? So yeah, completely agree with you.
Yeah, they would be missing out on a huge chunk of the opportunity there. 100%. Very cool. So I think I want to skip here to the last question, which kind of takes us to the end of the purchasing. Well, perhaps not of the purchasing journey itself, but of the entire flow, right? So we started with research. We then talked about interfaces and approvals. Then we talked about negotiation, quoting, requests. And now what happens afterwards, right? What are some of the technological touch points in place that distributors use to ship orders, to track inventory as it changes, to update product data, and perhaps most importantly, to keep the customer in the loop as all this happens and keep them engaged, keep them informed, and ultimately provide, the bow on the experience. So can you perhaps talk a little bit about, either in general or specifically with BigCommerce, how the technology can help manufacturers with the post-purchase and ongoing transactional activities that result from all of this?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about the buyer experience. What does the buyer see? How do we get them to transact? But often what merchants care about most is operating a business. I'm a manufacturer, I'm building product. The sales bit is a small part of my entire business journey. I'm building product. I have to source the raw materials. I have to get them into my factories in the right quantities. Then we've got to go through the building process and then ship them out. And there are lots of systems involved in that process. Often B2B businesses have a single source of truth, and that is capturing orders, it's holding pricing, it holds customer information. That's usually the ERP. That could be something like a NetSuite, like an Acumatica, like a Microsoft Dynamics, Epicor, Infor. There's lots of them out there. And that will capture orders from the front end that maybe come through the BigCommerce site, and they get piped into the ERP. Once they're down there, there's a flow that is kicked off. That may be if the item is customized production, right? If it's not customized, maybe it is being able to ship and starting off a shipping process. Or there's an order management system that might deal with that, which, in B2B, we're often dealing with pallets rather than boxes. So it's not necessarily a FedEx. We've got to find another way to ship these items. Maybe it's less than truckload. It could be a full truckload. Lots of complexity there. And so the holy grail, if you like, for B2B businesses is to have that front end and all of these systems connected together so that they are always keeping each other up to date. What does that flow? What do I mean by that? Order placed on the front end. Shipping has been selected as part of that order. Funnels into the ERP. Maybe as I said, maybe let's imagine in this case, we have the inventory. Fantastic. Off to our order management system. Order management system is going to handle all of our shipping needs. So it's going to find the right shipping requirements. It's going to go out. Maybe this is a full truck. So we have to figure out how we're going to get a full truck. Done it. Perfect. That OMS needs to talk to the ERP to send the data back, and it needs to talk to BigCommerce. And what it's going to tell BigCommerce is, oh, by the way, this order, I've now found the truck, we're good, and it's now been shipped, or it's being prepared. And it tells BigCommerce. And that means that the buyer can log back into this site and they'll see, oh, look, I can see that my order's updated. It says it's being prepared, or it says it's being shipped. And so the buyer then has control. They understand where their order is in that purchasing flow. And that's really important because the more information you can give the buyer, both before and after, this is sort of post-purchase, you can give the buyer after that purchase, the happier they're going to be. They feel like they understand the process, and they don't have to pick up the phone and speak to the sales team to ask the question. On the flip side, before purchase, you also need some of this information, right? I just mentioned it. Is it in stock? If it's not in stock, what's the lead time? And then all of the delivery options that are available that will have lots of different prices. And so merchants might be using something like a shipper HQ to get all of that shipping quoting into their checkout. I mentioned our buyer survey. One of the number one reasons that buyers leave the checkout process is because you don't have up-to-date shipping information, right? And so you've got to get that information into your checkout and have it there and available, right? And we mentioned quoting. So I've gone through the process of a quote. I have a new price set. Well, once I've agreed that pricing in that quote, that becomes the de facto pricing for that buyer. I need to make sure that's now in my ERP, and it's the price that this buyer is now going to pay, right, for all of their purchases into the future. Maybe not, but if that's how my agreements work, I have to make sure that pricing is updated. And so, don't want to get too technical, but really, what merchants should be looking for when they're looking at an e-commerce platform, looking at ERP, looking at OMS, maybe a CRM as well could sit in this stack, in this technology stack, is the APIs that enable you to connect all of these systems. In BigCommerce, we are API first, but not API only. And so pretty much everything that you can do in BigCommerce as a platform, there's an API for it. And that means you can connect it to any of those systems. You can connect it to your CRM. So quote in BigCommerce can go straight into your CRM, right? And that connectivity is great for the salespeople. Or order being placed is now in your ERP, which can then kick off that production workflow. And that's, I think if you speak to manufacturers and distributors, it's actually, the nut of most importance to them. Front end is fantastic, but making sure the business is running smoothly and efficiently is of the utmost importance.
Oh yeah, and I think that is also could be an entire different topic, is systems integration, the best practices that come with that, how important it is to have healthy data flowing through these, whether it's API, webhook, file exchange, whatever it may be, having healthy, rich, accurate data, and making sure that everything is stitched together and that information is being sent to the right place at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. That it's timely and accurate. We've just shipped out. Can the buyer get that information? Do they know it? Can they see it? And how long is it going to take for them to get that information? If you're maybe on an older system that isn't connected into your e-commerce platform, maybe that's 2 days before someone manually updates it. Buyers might get pretty frustrated without having that information. And they may pick up the phone and speak to your sales team who should be out there selling, and that's not great for business.
Yep. So you mentioned, tell us a little bit about how BigCommerce structures its offerings when it comes to the core platform, perhaps higher tiers, and whether that includes B2B functionality, just some general education there for our listeners.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that. So BigCommerce has supported manufacturers, distributors for a very long time on the platform. And in fact, it was 2017 when we released two of the core features for B2B, which is price lists. So having bespoke pricing for specific customers, that's kind of number one. And number two, bespoke cataloging. So having specific catalogs for specific customers, again, specific buyers, specific companies. With that, we also support 600 variants per SKU, right? That's a lot of customization. It's a lot of configuration that you can pack into products right there. And that all comes as part of what we call the BigCommerce enterprise store plan. And so that's the kind of enterprise plan that majority of manufacturers and distributors would purchase. We have some cheaper store plans as well that don't come necessarily with all of those features and functions. But when B2B businesses kind of want to take their digitization to the next stage, we built something called B2B Edition. It sits on top of that enterprise plan, and with that, we've built companies. So the ability to have multiple users log in on behalf of the company. Very, very fantastic feature that lots and lots of merchants are using. Quoting, I mentioned that out of the box, both the front end, so built into your site, and the back end, so your sales team can interact with that quote, respond to it, add discounts. Invoicing, really important. Most of those purchases that are being made are not being paid for at the time of purchase. They're being paid for in 30 days, and you want that invoice to be available in the e-commerce site. That's the best way to track and to get payment. Buyer approval workflows. So, that we spoke about it, kind of that junior, senior buyer workflow. Junior buyer puts products into a cart, senior buyer approves it. Kind of trade applications, payment visibility controls. There's quite a bit more in there as well, but that's a pretty good overview. And so lots of B2B merchants come to us and they take out that enterprise plan and they grow into B2B Edition because now they're going to bring quoting in, now they're going to bring invoicing in. So it's a really easy path and transition to get online with BigCommerce and then to keep improving that process, keep digitizing, keep automating with all of the tools that B2B Edition has. With building out that customization.
For sure. Yeah. Anything is possible, right? As long as you have the budget.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. As long as you have the open e-commerce platform and the budget.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Lance. This has been great. A lot of good information and talking points. I'm sure there will be more of these in the future with different topics. Anything you want to put out there before we wrap it up today?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would say is, venturing into e-commerce can seem daunting, even for large businesses, but it just doesn't have to be. Pick an e-commerce platform that will enable you to grow as you continue to digitize your tech stack. And get you online as fast as possible. Get that top of funnel working so that your sales team can close more and you can continue to grow your business.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I'm sure wherever this is posted, we'll have information about how to reach you, how to get in contact with BigCommerce and understand the platform and help people through that platform choice. And as well as Ziphity's information, who, like you said, is one of the, or like you alluded to, is one of the agencies that can help fill in any of the gaps and stitch any of these systems together. But great. So with that, I'll leave it, and we'll catch up next time.
Thanks, Marco. Thanks for having me.
Cool.